Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'd like to welcome you to this webinar. I'm Joe Pearson. I'm the chair of the Open Horizon project, which is an open source project within LF Edge. If you're watching this, I'm assuming that you're interested in the LFX mentorship program and how it worked out for the mentees and the Open Horizon project this past fall, which was our first term with the project. Next slide, please. So what we're going to go over today, I'm going to let you know a little bit about a background about our project itself, and then we'll jump in and talk directly to the mentors and the mentees. Next slide. So it's important for you to understand some of the tasks that the mentees worked on and what their relevance is to the project. So here's a little bit of background about the solutions that Open Horizon actually provides. Some of it is highly technical. Don't worry about the details. Just let's focus on the big picture here. Open Horizon is about delivering containerized applications and machine learning metadata to edge compute nodes, and it allows you to then manage their lifecycle. So it does this through an intent-based policy mechanism that securely and autonomously delivers the workloads to edge compute nodes of varying sizes and capabilities in various connected states. The bottom line is what it allows a single administrator to do is to say, I want to deliver this workload that may hypothetically look at the shelves on a supermarket and say, are these shelves empty and do they need to be restocked? And through an intent-based policy, say, I want you to deliver this workload to smart cameras that have a purpose of checking shelves. So rather than knowing exactly precisely which edge nodes do what tasks, you just say the outcome you're looking for. Open Horizon also allows workload and model management across fleets. That means, collections of devices at hyperscale. And hyperscale, if you're not familiar with the term, typically, implies something that gets a tremendous volume of traffic and has a tremendous number of compute nodes. So for example, a very large website that receives 150 million page views a day is hyperscale. Likewise, if you're talking about edge compute nodes that number in the tens of thousands, all the way up to the billions, that's hyperscale. So we deliver those to a single Linux device or a Kubernetes cluster to deployments of up to 30,000 nodes or more without requiring someone to be physically there to manipulate the device. So the bottom line is we are doing this to make it easier for enterprises to manage the applications, both the deployment and their lifecycle. Next slide. So the various component pieces that are involved here, we typically divide it into two classes. At the top on the right there, you see the management hub. So there are pieces that manage the deployment. They hold the definitions of the work and things like that. And at the bottom, what you see is the different types of destinations that we send applications to, clusters and devices. And they could be a mobile device like a car. It could be a small server in a closet somewhere, or it could be something outside of a traditional data center, but someplace that has a lot of compute. And something like that we might typically call the network edge. Next slide. So to give you a tiny bit more information about Open Horizon, what you'll see on the left of this diagram is the agent component. This is the autonomous piece of software that is responsible for getting the information about a workload, getting it running, and keeping it running. On the right-hand side, you'll see information about the management hub components. There are 4 that are listed here. This is a logical diagram, not a more physical diagram. It doesn't represent actual standalone services necessarily, but it does represent the various logical pieces here. And there is one missing, but they are from a very high level. The agreement bot, which is responsible for talking with the autonomous devices and saying, we think you should run this. If you agree, go ahead. So that's an agreement. There's the switchboard, which is where we communicate with encrypted messages. There's the exchange, which is essentially the programmatic set of APIs that we use. and the model manager, which is how we would sync machine learning assets. The other component that's not shown here is something that's been added relatively recently to the project, and that's secure device onboarding. That is another open source project within LF Edge, and that allows us to automatically get our agent installed directly on devices as soon as you add network connectivity and power, without having to actually physically send someone to the device and get it configured in the first place. So that's a very quick overview of the project itself. Next slide. So now we're going to talk about the LFX mentorship program. And I'm going to take just a few minutes to give you the background to let you know why we did this in the very first place. Last summer, we had staff that worked with us on the project whose daughter summer internship fell through because of coronavirus, COVID. So she asked us, said, could her daughter have an informal internship with the project? Could she work with us? And we have no objections to qualified volunteers helping us out. So David Booz interviewed her a bit. She had the skill sets that we needed and the time and the desire. So he worked with her over the summer on issues that we had that were very important to the project, but had not been prioritized. And she had a great experience, and it really helped the project develop some important new features. So that really set the stage for letting us know, hey, there's this world out there of people that could benefit from working with our project, and we can benefit from it as well. We should definitely pursue this. So in the fall, the Linux Foundation has a group that runs it called the Technical Advisory Committee, the TAC. They let all the member projects know that the Linux Foundation and Intel had contributed funds to pay stipends towards people who wanted to complete a mentorship with a Linux Foundation project. So based on our successful experience over the summer, we volunteered to participate. So after learning what all the details were and how it worked, we identified 4 volunteer mentors whom you'll meet in a minute. And we opened up our project applications, and each mentor eventually settled on a preferred candidate whom you'll meet. So from October to the end of December last year, each mentee worked with their mentor on their duties, learned about our platform, and some even learned a new programming language in the process. Each one completed their task successfully and graduated from the program. So overall, it's been a very positive experience for all of us. And one of the things that made me especially happy was to see the various posts that the mentees made on LinkedIn and social media as they were accepted to the program, completed meaningful work, and graduated. And one of our mentees was even invited to speak to the LFEdge Technical Advisory Committee about her experiences in the program. And if they get the chance, I'm curious to hear from the mentees about how this program has affected their reputation or their eminence in their community since they've completed this. So next slide. So now I'll briefly describe the mentors and the mentees before letting them introduce themselves and describe their experiences. So we had 4 mentors. On the left, Los is in Shanghai, China. He works with IBM China Labs, and he works very closely with a special interest group that Open Horizon formed called the China Manufacturing Special Interest Group. He volunteered to be a mentor with the program. We have David Booz, who's been with the program since it started over 5 years ago and knows more about the software than any of the rest of us involved. He's also the chief architect. We have Troy Fine, who's a relative new member to the project, a new maintainer, and runs our developer examples section. And then myself. I'm not actually a developer on the project, but I am currently running the documentation working group, and I was voted in as chair of the Open Horizon project. Next slide. And then here we have the 4 mentees. We have Clement, whom you'll meet. He's based on the West Coast of the United States. We have Eddie, who's based in Nigeria, Anurithi, who's in India, and Han Gao, who is, oh boy, correct me if I'm wrong. Were you in Denmark?
Oh, in Netherlands.
Netherlands. It's Europe. Sorry. Okay, so without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So for this past fall term, I was actually able to be a mentor. I'm a firm believer in, if you're going to ask other people to do something, you better be willing to do it yourself as well. So because I ran the documentation working group, and because we had a lot of big, hairy tasks to accomplish that were a little challenging, not something someone would definitely have to do some research over. And they would definitely last about a 3-month time period. We definitely wanted to see if we could find a mentor who was able to do this. And we found Eddie, who's very accomplished. And I think this project actually didn't stress his technical abilities very much. He's certainly capable of a whole lot more than what we asked him to do here, but he was perfectly willing to jump in and tackle one of the efforts that we did have available for documentation. So I'll go ahead and let Eddie introduce himself and speak to what he did.
All right, thanks, Joe. So my name is Eddie Diongetuk, but you can call me Eddie. So like Joe said, I'm a bit technical, so I'm sort of like a DevOps and site reliability engineer. But for this project, my main focus was to work on migrating the documentation from IBM Edge Application Manager to like Open Horizon. So basically, we're to move the documentation from closed source to open source. So Joe Pearson, who just spoke, was my mentor. Next slide, please. So from the initial stage, when Joe was talking, he was like, he's not going to go into the technical part. So he's going to talk about big picture. So I'm sort of like following my mentor here, and I'm saying, okay, I'm not going to talk about the technical part of my project. I'm just going to talk about the big picture. So how I got the best out of my internship. Next slide. So yes, things I plan to do in the internship. So when I got selected and I knew I was going into the documentation, I said, okay, I wanted to learn a bit about how to be a better team player, how to be more involved in the project, because most times I usually like work alone and not like fully in teams, and how to be more organized because I'm way, way, way disorganized. And then also expand my knowledge and my skills. And at the end, we'll see how I was able to expand my knowledge and my skills. Next slide, please. So yes, how I became a better team player. So through this internship, I was able to learn how to listen. Like you're going to be on a working group call. I think one of the mentees is going to talk about working groups, but you're going to be in a working group call, and you could join like 2 or 3 different working groups, and you don't know what they're talking about. So you have to, for you to learn, you have to know how to listen. You need to know how to like work in a team, be together with everybody. Also, through the internship, I realized that this community sort of made sure that none of my inputs were wasted. Like if you check the previous recordings of all our calls, you're going to see that I say something and they're like, oh, that's a nice idea. And then it's built upon. Like everything I did say was used. And then also celebrating peers' successes. I know there are times when Clement had a pull request merged. It was really fun in the mentees channel. Next slide. Yeah, being more involved in the project. So one thing I think I would advise anybody who is watching this is you shouldn't be afraid to ask questions, no matter how dumb they are. Because what you feel is a dumb question now, 3 months, 4 months down the line, some other person is going to have that same dumb question. So it's not actually a dumb question. It's actually a very important question. So you need to ask questions, ask a lot of it. You're definitely, nobody's going to say, oh, you asked a lot of questions, please leave me alone. This isn't a competition. It's like, it's a community itself. Yeah. Try several things. I did try a lot of things. I did try different approaches to solving a particular problem. I don't want to go into the technical part, but just so you know, I failed massively in one of the things I wanted to do. And luckily, Joe was by my side to like help me through some of them. So yeah. I assisted others when I could. At some point, because I have a lot of experience with Docker. I have experience with CI/CD. So there were times during the internship, like there was some sort of Docker issue. I would throw in some tips to the other mentees. It had nothing to do with my project, but then I basically learned a lot about how Open Horizon communicates with the various Docker services and how everything how the entire big picture was going to be. And finally, which I can't overemphasize enough, is ask a lot more questions. Don't just keep mum. If you keep mum, then you're probably going to fail in the mentorship program. So just ask a lot of questions. If the mentors don't reply you, we have Glendalian. We have a lot of people who are already involved with the project that are not mentors who would actually assist you. Next slide, please. Being more organized. So I wasn't actually really a good person, like from an organizational point of view, but I learned how to take notes down during like meetings. Like there is really no way you're going to attend a working group meeting that you won't take notes down. If you don't take notes down, then you have to go back. Even when you take notes down, you have to go back and watch the video to get everything that you like that was spoken about. So this helped me organize myself, create to-do list, action points. Okay, I need to do this next. I need to do that next. And this entire thing made me manage my time better. So if I'm in a project next, I don't just jump right into the project. I know exactly what it is I want to do and how to manage my time. Next slide, please. Oh yes, expand my knowledge and skills. So because I was working purely on documentation, yeah, I was able to learn a lot. I was able to read a bit of Go code thanks to Anurithi. She worked on the purely technical like Go side, and I was able to read a bit of Go code, and that it was really fun because Open Horizon is based on Go. I was able to learn about that. I was able to become I think there was a time when where no one really knew how the payment structure and evaluation structure was going to be like. So I spoke with my mentor, and then I communicated. My mentor was sort of like the chief of Horizon. So he sort of like two sides. So I had to take some of his inputs and tell the other mentees. So it sort of made everything a bit easier. I had to study a lot of writings. Like I didn't reading documentation. I don't know, but I'm sure everybody can actually like admit that reading documentation is hard. And I had to read a lot of documentation. Like I think about 76 pages worth of documentation. So that was a lot. I also attended webinars, and then finally I also built and I got hands-on. Next slide. So the end product, which is something because Joe said he would be interested to know how being this mentorship has helped improve. So yes, I'm a better technical content creator right now because I think I've been accepted to about 3 or 4 authorship programs with some like test-driven, sanity.io. So they want me to write articles based on some technical aspect. And now I know how to structure, because having read documentations here, you know how to structure articles better. You know the kind of language to use, avoid bi-directional languages. So that really helped me. I also became a better team player. And I'm also not afraid of taking up responsibilities. Like, yeah, I want to go headstrong into anything. I own the entire development cycle of my project. Yes, like I legit handle that. Joe may have objections to this, but then hopefully he won't talk next. So yes, and then I'm also hoping to get more involved in Open Horizon. I think there's presently an issue with our quality being at 13%, using the best practices. So I want to work with Dave and other like contributors to try to improve that process. So next slide, please. Yeah, thank you, Joe, for being a great mentor and like also helping me out, talking to me at odd hours, because my time it was odd hours, and then talking to me at odd hours. Thanks, Renee. Renee is not on this call, but Renee really helped add in some input because she's still purely on the IBM side, I think. So she sort of helped with some of the documentation, being like a source. Thanks, Mosquito. Mosquito is Glenda. If you're actually on Open Horizon, you would have seen videos here. Mosquito does those videos. His name is actually Glenn Darling, but then Mosquito is more fun. And then thanks to like everybody in the Open Horizon community. Thank you to Linux Foundation, LFH for actually enabling this to happen. And yeah, to my commentees, Clement, Anurithi, Han, we had our weekly stand-ups, which is actually not official. It wasn't official, but then we actually got to do it, and it was fun bonding with everybody. So yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you, Eddie. That was great. And yeah, you make some very important points there, one of which is it's okay to fail. Failure is definitely not final. It's actually how you learn about what doesn't work. And the important thing is to then continue and try again using a different approach. So very good, thank you. Next, we have Troy Fine, who leads the Examples Working Group. and he worked with Clement. So Troy, go ahead. Volume. We can't hear it. Yeah, May, we can't hear it at all.
Okay, you can't hear it at all?
No, at all.
No. I can hear it faintly, but very faintly.
Okay.
So maybe it's just the volume of the video.
Okay, let me try doing this.
Hello, my name is Troy Fine.
No?
I am an engineer at IBM, and I work with the LF Open Horizon project, mostly with the examples kind of side of things. But yeah, this was my first time participating in the mentorship program, but I thought working with Clement was an excellent experience. He tackled everything I threw at him and more. He had, of course, never worked with Open Horizon before, but he learned quickly and was able to make meaningful contributions in no time. We were in a bit of a transformation phase, I would say, but that also did not slow him down either. He was always looking for more stuff to do, and he even implemented some changes to the Horizon, like the HCN CLI, and that I did not expect, so that was great. In addition to, we had weekly one-on-one meetings, I think 2 a week. I also hold a bi-weekly examples working group meeting, and he was always attending those. He had awesome questions. He was not afraid to ask them and share. But yeah, I also feel like I learned a lot. I've never created like a schedule and work items for someone else. But we work together, and I think the Open Horizon project is all the better for it. Oh yeah, and though he does not have to, he's still attending those working group meetings and still contributes often. So it's great. But yeah, it was an excellent experience, and thank you again, Clement.
Thank you, Troy. Before I get started, May, is it possible for you to move into presenter mode for PowerPoint, or is that?
Yeah.
Oh, cool, thank you. All right, next slide, please. Hi, everyone. My name is Colin Ng. I'm a software engineer at Cisco Meraki and an open source enthusiast. I initially applied for LF Edge mentorship because I wanted some more guidance in contributing beyond the good first issues of many open source repos. My mentor was Troy Fine, and we were working on restructuring the examples repo to break out individual services so developers could more easily contribute to them. Next slide. So after a couple of weeks in OH, I had experienced a couple of working group meetings and generally found it hard to get a lot out of them. I realized I had a new primary goal. Next. To say something during my working group meetings. Now, why is that my goal? In the past, I've worked on other open source projects, but OH examples is different for a number of reasons. There are fewer developers working on the examples project. The documentation is more distributed. I've seen info on OH in YouTube videos, the OH site, the LF Edge website, the LF Edge Slack, the OH examples annex and DevOps repos, the IBM docs, of which there are a couple of versions, other affiliated repos like David Martin's Open Horizon repo, and of course, people's heads. Another difference I noticed is that PRs don't come in very regularly, but they can be predicted. They tend to follow from conversations on how examples ought to be. Next slide. So enter working group meetings. Working group meetings ended up being one of the best places to get work done. They're useful for getting buy-in on ideas from people more quickly, learning info that isn't necessarily written down, and getting redirected to the right place if it is written down, and talking about examples and pushing/receiving action items, which can spawn those PRs. Next slide. So what did I do to get more out of working group meetings? Well, before the meeting, I set up bi-weekly sync meetings with my mentor first to get more familiar with OH. So shout out to Troy for often going overtime to help me. I thought about anything I wanted to bring up for discussion as well, even if it's a small update on what I was doing. And I did some research on terms I didn't know from the last meeting. One of the first things I looked up was what is, at a general level, a Movidius compute stick. And I'll leave that as an exercise for the viewer. Next slide. During the meeting, I would do my best to note and follow conversations, even if they're out of my technical depth, because you never know when the dots might connect. The example on the right is kind of an extreme example where I did my best to connect the ideas to specific people, so I remember the flow of the conversation. Some people on this call might recognize their initials there. I would also find some ways to contribute during the working group meetings, such as adding agenda items when Troy asks and asking questions on unfamiliar topics. One thing that helped me was thinking of the meeting as a longer stand-up rather than a more formal meeting, so I saw it as a good chance to get unblocked on something while everyone was there. I would also keep an eye out for any action items. Next slide. So after the working group meetings, I would try to do some of the action items that weren't assigned to help push things forward. Like Eddie said, I would also rewatch the working group meetings when I had a chance. After a particularly technical discussion, sometimes Troy would chime back in at the end and mention that he'd be rewatching the meeting. That small mission made me feel more comfortable not understanding things fully the first time around, and a second watch of working group meetings has helped me understand things better. I would reach out to other people as well to continue progressing, and when it came time to write code, I would do my best to explain things carefully in PRs, trying to make sure there's enough context so it could stand alone. Next slide. So what I've learned in no particular order. I've definitely worked with many technologies I haven't touched too much before, such as, next, Open Horizon, Make, Bash, NPM, Docker, Go, MQTT, and the berry on top, next. Raspberry Pi. One particular skill I find useful now that I didn't have before is just being able to be more comfortable around Docker containers and debugging them. Next slide. What I've done. Even though I was an open source developer before joining OH, I hit a major milestone. I opened my first ever issue and solved it. This is in the Annex repo, and before I mainly just worked on other people's issues, so it was good to see the issue to PR cycle fully. Next. I was also able to get an MQTT broker service into our new Open Horizon Services organization and added some base authentication. About halfway through my mentorship, our working group realized that we wanted to introduce best practices into our new examples organization, so more conversations were needed on how to define those best practices. I'm still glad I had a chance to get a simple service in there despite the unexpected delay. I guess the video is not playing, but it would have shown that base authentication. So moving on. I was also able to help, oh, sorry, my bad, that's another transition. I was also able to reduce the number of the backlog of open examples issues with Troy. So for example, users are now able to set the public value of their service given that we're returning to multi-tenant architecture. And I've also worked on trying to develop repos outside of OH that we're trying to make into Horizon examples, such as Glenn Darling's Akatina and Troy's Wi-Fi single strength mapper. And yes, you can now hear me speaking in working group meetings now, which is the largest change I've honestly noticed. This has also helped my original goal of getting involved beyond the good first issues, since I'm still involved in the larger examples restructuring project. Next slide. So in the future, I hope to continue what I'm doing, keep contributing to my original project, working on old/new issues and services and get them off the ground, and trying to sweep up any forgotten action items from the working group meetings. Next slide. So a shout out and thanks is in order. Shout out to Troy for being my mentor, Glenn Darling and Mosquito, and David Martin for being experienced engineers who are providing a lot of ideas and code for the examples restructuring. Joe for asking if I had any thoughts during an early examples working group meeting and always giving me the space to speak up. Other people who have reviewed my code, such as David, Ling, and Bruce, and my fellow mentees for going through this mentorship with me and helping out in a couple of issues, Eddie, Han, and Anurithi. Next. Y'all are awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Clement. That was great. And the Open Horizon Services org that you've worked on is going to become very, very important this year. So it's neat that you had a hand in it from the very beginning in its creation. And I'm sure it'll be fun to look back and say, I helped start that when it becomes a big deal. So next we have the China Manufacturing Special Interest Group. Los was the mentor there, and he worked together with Han Gao on there. This was very interesting because Los actually had some very ambitious goals for what he wanted to get done, and Han Gao had a tremendous amount of abilities, both technical, linguistic, organizational, and otherwise. And some really interesting things came out of it. But one of the things I really appreciated was the really detailed plans and bullet points that Han actually put together and shared with both Los and myself. So go ahead, Han, take it away.
Thank you, Joe. So first of all, that's could you please switch to the next slide? Yeah, let me please introduce myself first. My name is Han Gao. I'm from China and currently study and working at Netherlands. And I'm a second-year software technology program student in Eindhoven University of Technology. My mentor is Los. He's based in China, Beijing. And next slide. Let me start to introduce my mentorship journey first. So my Open Horizon mentorship journey started from, I would say, last October. And before that, I searched a lot of projects and to see which is appropriate one that I can work on. And I feel so lucky that I find the one that I would like to contribute and I work a lot with Open Horizon. Of that, I would say, phase, I decided to apply for it. And after I accept it, then I planned all the tasks that I wanted to work on with my mentor together. And I would say the next step is that I execute it and verify, validate all the process with my mentor. Of that, the last step is wrap up, that we finish all things and push out to the, I would say, GitHub to expose all our materials to share with our audience who can access to it. Next slide, please. Well, about what I learned during the Open Horizon mentorship program, I would like to divide it into three perspectives. First one is open source, because before I joined this project, the all impression about open source program, for example, like the one I did before, that is kind of required a lot of professional skills, how to program, how to understand the mechanism. But after I do a lot during the Open Horizon program, I realized that it's not only required professional skill, practice your coding skill, coding understanding, how to use GitHub. I would say commit your PR. Besides that, also required a lot of non-professional skills. For example, that how to cooperate with others, especially your mentor, and how to make each other understand the requirements and what's the problem is also very important. By this, I mean the communication skills. Besides the expression ability, which I mean that how to describe abstraction program in the very concrete level. Because sometimes for us that the software is very abstract, and when some specific problem pop up, you need to find appropriate terminology to make each other understand it, especially when you are talking with different stakeholders who could be manager, who could be engineers, and you cannot use the same terminology to tell what's going on. You need to think about it and wrap it to make sure that they can understand what you are talking about. So that's, I would say, are most important things besides the professional skill that you need to handle. Others, I would say that, well, specifically for Open Horizon project, I have an opportunity to work closely with other three team, I would say mentees. For example, Anurithi, Abdi, and Clement. We have a channel together. I would say that it makes us feel very close. Besides that, we became a good friend. So I would say it's kind of a gift that you can to try to contribute to the open source project. But at the same time, that you can receive the friendship is absolutely a good opportunity that you can see. Besides all the things you do, you can also learn and as well as get friends. The next another perspective I want to say is that the LFH, what I learned during this project about LFH is very, I would say, impressive because you know that Open Horizon is a sub-project of LFH, but it's also connected closely with other LFH projects, for example, SDO and Age Foundry. That I have a lot of opportunity that to understand what's the cooperation work, what's the difference, and how Open Horizon work closely with them through, I would say, the documentation, discussion, interview with Joe, and my mentor, as well as we can find a lot of materials and videos through the YouTube channel of LFH. So I would say that it's absolutely a good platform for any contributor to understand more about not only about Open Horizon, but also the other open projects that open source projects of LFH. And next slide. The last part I want to share about what I learned through the Open Horizon itself. Well, you can see that at the right side that Open Horizon is a well-organized open source community that it doesn't only have, I would say, the overall high-level organization, but it has also separate, we call that a working group, specifically for different components. For example, we have agent and DevOps specifically workshop, as well as you know, that documentation working group. So if you are a contributor that not only wanted to contribute to code, you can also find a appropriate working group, for example, documentation. You can find any appropriate group that you want to work for. So it's absolute organization that you can definitely find the destination that you want to go. Please click. Another thing I wanted to share about my first issue fix, which is the beginning of this journey. I would say that you can find a lot of tags in the Open Horizon GitHub platform that a lot issue are presented in different talks. For example, some are talked as first issue, which very friendly that tell the, I would say, the junior contributor that where is a good place to start. So I started from that side and learned a lot because you can also find the reviewers and the responser that you can ask for the help. So I learned a lot during this process, not only for the bug fix, but also get a well know about the journey that where I can do and where I can go. Click it. Next step is next thing I wanted to talk about is the documentation, my main work. As Joe mentioned that in China that there's a big group and those also arranged, those interesting group that who want to know more about Open Horizon. I would say that definitely they can access to the Open Horizon official website, which is in English, but also on the other hand, some of them want to know that easily inconvenient of, I would say, written in Chinese. In the other hand, that not only that to write it down in Chinese, but also arrange the materials. For example, the workflow of agent, how it works, and how the, I would say, one solution, one work solution, and end-to-end DevOps, for example, that like this, and etc. That I was delegated to work on that and written them well to make sure that all the audience and readers can understand each components and get deeper understanding about it. The last part is about the tooling. I would say this is in the management level. Could you please click it? I would say it's introduced by David. During the mentorship program, David introduced us this excellent, I would say, tooling for the GitHub. That what I learned a lot about it is that for a lot of open source projects, they use, for example, other tooling besides GitHub to manage the reviewing process or present all the progress of that, which bring out a lot additional effort and time to think about it. But this kind of tooling introduced by the David make every contributor clear about what's the progress, and David guide, I would say, the group of annex together that to review, go through it during the every working group view, which is very benefits to every contributors as well as the organizers. Click it next. Last point, I wanted to appreciate Joe first because he's guide that who bring me in these projects, and besides that, he also support a lot during the period that I get a lot confusing, and I was sometimes I was a lot that was the direction I'm supposed to do, and where I'm supposed to go. That he brought me a lot, I would say, very brighting ideas and helped me to understand the project deeply. Besides, I want to thank Gavin, who is a colleague of Lowe's, my mentor, as well as my mentor, of course, that he supported me a lot during the period when I writing the documentation. He helped review and task arrangement. And David as well, because I brought him a lot, that's basically for the technical questions, and also he gave a lot details about, for example, you need a test and answer a lot of questions. And last but not least is, I would say, my mentees colleagues. They really support a lot. We have a weekly meeting during the project, and they guide me that you understand, and not only based on my project, but also theirs. We share the knowledge together, interact with each other, and we're growing up together. Thank you very much. And I handle it back to the Joe.
Great, thanks a lot, Han. One thing he didn't mention was Han actually did a great job setting up a full-featured demo environment in China. And the people over there are very thankful to everything he's done to help support the effort. And they believe he has a big future being a developer evangelist or developer advocate for Open Horizon in China. So thank you very much, Han. Moving on, our last mentor and mentee pair, David Booz, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. And thanks to the mentees who've presented so far. I appreciate the work that you have all done so far. Yeah, so as Joe said, yeah, my name's David Booz. I have been involved with this project since the beginning. I'm one of the founders of the source code. And when we started this 5 or 6 years ago, we started it in the open, mostly, to be perfectly honest with you, mostly so that the work could be seen in the open, but we didn't start it to be an open source project. And so it's one of the things we've tried to do in the last few years was to transition the project into more of a community experience where other people can get involved and bring their ideas and help us build this. And I'm very excited to see the number of people who are involved in these mentees as well. When Joe came to me and said he had, we had this ability with LF Edge now to get a mentee, I think it was a great idea. And so we spent some time, and it was hard, but I narrowed it down to Anurithi to be my first mentee within this program. And I do not regret the choice one bit. I had an idea, I had a project in mind for whoever the mentee was going to be. And I already had it in mind that this was going to be a little bit complicated, probably for a university student. But at the same time, I wanted them to be able to have the experience of open source development, but also what software development is really like as a profession. Software development as a hobby or as a university student is one thing. It's a whole nother level of skills and understanding of computer science and how to apply it in order to be successful as a software developer professionally. And so I threw Anurithi right into the deep end. Got her started with a couple of easy things, but she rose to the challenge, and she was able to successfully complete what I expected her to do a few weeks before we were done. So she was outstanding, and I'll let her talk about her experiences. But yeah, it was a great experience, and as a mentee, I think it's a good opportunity to give back to others as well. I've been doing this for over 30 years. I have a lot of experience with commercial software development. And so, this is an opportunity to give back a little bit too, and I appreciate LF Edge's opportunity to do this. So Anurithi, I'll let you talk for yourself.
Thank you, David. That means a lot. Next slide, please. So, hello everyone. I am Anurithi Jain. I am currently a final year undergraduate pursuing computer science and engineering from India. I was part of the Open Horizon Mentorship program during the fall term from October to December 2020. Next slide, please. So before this, I had never contributed to open source in a meaningful way, but it was not for lack of trying. Large code bases seemed daunting to me as a beginner, and I couldn't really pick a place to start. So I would always eventually give up. I learned about the LFX mentorship program from a previous mentee whom I met at KubeCon Europe. Dedicated mentorship and minimal previous experience requirements were exactly what I needed to get started. So while browsing projects, I came across Open Horizon, which was based on edge computing. I had been introduced to cloud computing through my previous internship, and this seemed somewhat similar, but still very new, so it sparked my curiosity. About 10 YouTube videos and a lot of articles later, I was left astounded by this concept of bringing processing power closer to where data is being generated. So I applied to this project, hoping to learn more and even contribute if possible. Next slide, please. To my amazement, I got the opportunity. Coming to my project, so earlier, MongoDB was the only production-capable database that could be configured for the Cloud Sync service storage. But Mongo recently changed their licensing terms, making it harder to consume Open Horizon as a commercial product. The storage component of the Sync service has a Golang interface that is used by the core to persist object metadata and the objects themselves, which are mostly machine learning models. So my task was to provide an implementation of the interface that works with CouchDB to extend the Sync service to support CouchDB as an alternative. Next slide, please. Soon I realized that getting selected was just the beginning, and I didn't really know anything. I was new to the community, code base, tech stack, and I had never even seen a design doc before. How was I supposed to make one? So I talked to my mentor, David, and he told me to not look at the project as one big task, but to start small. I think that was one of the turning points for me, because although it seems fairly obvious, it hadn't even occurred to me. So I began by fixing two smaller issues in the Open Horizon agent, and my mentor guided me through them, which significantly eased my transition into my actual project. I asked a lot of questions, even silly ones sometimes, I think, but he would always be there to answer them. Most importantly, he would make sure to describe his thought process, thus not only answering my questions, but also teaching me how to approach a problem. Even for my actual project, it helps to first write smaller sample programs for what I was trying to implement. Next slide, please. Further, David helped me develop an iterative approach to the project, where I would first understand the requirements, come up with an initial design, write some code, and then get it reviewed. Then we'd have some discussion about what needs to be changed or could be better, and I'd incorporate his suggestions in the next cycle. Often these reviews would just be questions for me to ponder with no absolute wrong or right answer. just meant for me to question and justify my choices or consider different trade-offs. These code reviews and discussions not only helped me improve my software engineering and design skills, but also helped develop my thinking process. I think it is important to mention that it wasn't without its challenges, as nothing is, but what kept me going was knowing that my mentor believed I could do it. And since he's so much more experienced than I am, he must know better, right? Next slide, please. Through this program, I got to become part of an amazing community where I hope to remain an active contributor. I think one of the best things about open source communities is that everyone is there because they want to be and not because something is forcing them to be. I got to meet and interact with mentees from all over the world with different skill sets and experience levels, which further aided collaboration and helped us leverage each other's skills. Next slide, please. I would like to conclude by saying that there is so much that I learned and so much that I am taking back from this experience. And for that, I'm grateful, especially to my mentor, David Booz, to Lily, Joe, and the entire Open Horizon community, Linux Foundation, and of course, my co-mentees, Eddie, Han, and Clement. Thank you.
Thank you, Anurithi. And right before we wrap this up, I'll mention that the website for all this information is at mentorship.lfx.linuxfoundation.org. That's where you'll find out information about the mentorship program, the projects involved, and so on. So briefly, this was our very first experience. I'm glad it worked out well. We all made little mistakes. We learned quite a bit. And we're in this for the long haul. We opened for applications for the spring term and just closed for applications 2 Fridays ago. And we are now sifting through a tremendous number of applications, trying to narrow things down. Again, we have 4 open slots, so we're attempting to bring on 4 new mentees, but we have a lot more experience with the process now. And we hope to have a final selection very shortly within the next few days or so. And by the way, we learned that we can create digital certificates of completion. So I have actually sent all those to the various mentees on Slack. So you should have those now in your Slack inbox. Thank you very much. And thank you for your time in the program. May.